What if the most beautiful day of someone's life could also be the most devastating for another? I was about to find out, seated in the third row, watching a scene unfold that would forever redefine what family truly meant. I had never imagined that humiliation could arrive adorned in silk and served with champagne. Yet, there I sat, clad in the one formal dress I possessed, doing my utmost to fade into a crowd of people who appeared impossibly polished and flawless. My son, Leo, was seated next to me, his legs dangling beneath the table, occasionally kicking an imaginary ball. He wore a miniature suit that had required stretching my budget across 2 paychecks to afford, each thread a testament to my effort. He beamed with pride, believing this day might finally make us feel like we belonged to the family again. Perhaps a small, stubborn part of me, against all better judgment, hoped for that as well. My sister, Clara, moved through the event like a cinematic heroine, every gesture perfectly orchestrated, every smile dazzling. She always possessed that kind of captivating energy, stunning, charismatic, and cherished by all, particularly our mother. She received the accolades. I received the critiques. She claimed the limelight. I adapted to life in the periphery, a permanent fixture in the background. People often assume that being the older sibling means you pave the way, that you are the one to be admired, the trailblazer. In my family, however, I served more as a cautionary tale than an exemplar. My name is Amelia. I'm 34, a single mother, and the self-proclaimed outcast of my family. I reside in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city with my son, Leo. He is 8 years old, a whirlwind of curious questions and boundless energy, the greatest joy of my life, and the sole reason I ever stepped back into spaces that once made me feel insignificant. I hold down 2 jobs, mornings at a bustling neighborhood diner, where the smell of coffee and bacon is my alarm clock, and evenings at the front desk of a boutique inn, often pulling double shifts when the budget feels particularly tight. My life lacks glamour, marked by early mornings and late nights, but it is entirely my own, built by my hands, piece by painstaking piece. I cook Leo pancakes on Saturdays, shaping them into funny animals. I'm surprisingly skilled at mending his jeans after one too many playground adventures, and he calls me his superhero. That truly is all the fuel I need. However, being a single mother in my family was synonymous with failure, a scarlet letter branded across my existence. My mother, Eleanor, an arbiter of appearances and social standing, ensured I felt this deeply at every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every milestone. Clara's wedding, in her eyes, was not just a celebration of love, but a grand public demonstration of the family's return to grace, a redemption for my perceived missteps. Clara is 5 years my junior, beautiful, effortlessly successful, and accustomed to having everything handed to her on a silver platter, yet she always managed to make it seem as though she had earned it all through sheer genius. She is the favored child, adored by Eleanor with a devotion that bordered on religious. If Clara so much as sneezed, our mother would instantly present her with a monogrammed silk handkerchief. If I fell ill, a feverish, trembling mess, I was told to take some generic vitamins and cease being overly dramatic, as if my very existence was an inconvenience. When I became pregnant with Leo, everything shifted, not just in my life, but in my family dynamics. I was 25 and deeply in love with a man who had promised to be my partner through everything, a future filled with shared laughter and quiet dreams. By the 5th month of my pregnancy, he was gone, no note, no goodbye, just an empty space where he used to be, a void in our shared apartment and in my heart. My family offered no inquiries, no assistance, no outstretched hands. They gave me only silence, deafening condemnation, and a relentless cascade of "I told you so," their eyes filled with a grim satisfaction that I had, once again, proven myself to be the family disappointment. "What did you expect?" my aunt had murmured at a family dinner, barely bothering to lower her voice. "That kind of girl always ends up alone." But then I had Leo, and the moment I held him, tiny and perfect in my arms, every harsh word they had ever uttered dissolved into background noise, a distant static in the face of his precious life. Still, a vulnerable part of me, hidden deep beneath layers of resilience, always wished they would eventually see me for who I was, not just as a single mother, not just as damaged goods, but as a person deserving of love, respect, and acceptance. That, perhaps, is why I accepted Clara's wedding invitation, a carefully worded card that managed to misspell my name. I did so despite not being included in the bridal party, despite the sting of the error on the card, and despite having to rent a dress that strained my budget and style my own hair in the bathroom mirror while Leo, already anticipating the grandness of the day, practiced his charming smile and his little tie. I convinced myself it was for closure, that this might be my family's subtle, long overdue way of offering an olive branch. A final, desperate hope for reconciliation. The venue was stunning, a triumph of opulent taste and meticulous planning. It was draped in swathes of white roses, each petal perfect, and glowed under the warm light of hundreds of fairy lights. Gold-trimmed tableware gleamed on every table, reflecting the distant, ethereal melody of a string quartet that played classical pieces with effortless grace. Clara looked as though she had stepped out of a bridal magazine, radiating smiles and sparkle, a living embodiment of perfection, soaking in every compliment and camera flash like a thirsty flower. When she approached me during the cocktail hour, her smile briefly tightened, a barely perceptible crack in her flawless facade. "You came," she remarked, her tone hinting at surprise, as if my presence were an unexpected anomaly. She glanced down at Leo, who was nervously fiddling with his miniature tie, and added, "He's getting so big," a perfunctory observation rather than a genuine sentiment. There was no embrace, no genuine warmth, just a brief, almost clinical exchange before she floated away, drawn back into the magnetic center of attention she so clearly relished. Eleanor walked past me minutes later as if I were part of the catering staff, offering no acknowledgement whatsoever, her eyes fixed on the more important guests. But Leo was mesmerized by it all. He whispered that the glittering chandelier resembled a spaceship preparing for takeoff and that Clara, in her shimmering gown, looked like a true princess from a storybook. Seeing his pure, unadulterated joy, I resolved to stay for the reception, even as the familiar, cold feeling of being an outsider settled like a heavy weight into my chest. I located our assigned seats at table 9, nestled near the back by the restrooms, a perfect spot for invisibility. I chuckled quietly at the bitter irony, knowing it was no accident. We ate our salads, me picking at the greens, and I helped Leo when he inevitably spilled chocolate mousse on his pristine white tie. I consciously avoided my mother's gaze and tried to tune out the sound of my name being whispered between clinking glasses, a phantom presence on the periphery of their conversations. Then the speeches began, and in that moment, a chilling realization washed over me. This evening was not about family reconciliation or forgiveness. It was simply another platform for Clara to dazzle, and I, it became terrifyingly clear, was about to be her main joke. It started as most wedding speeches do. Sweet, affectionate, and slightly over-rehearsed, laced with anecdotes about childhood mischief and the blossoming of love. Clara stood with flawless posture, a champagne flute held delicately in her freshly manicured hand, each nail a tiny jewel. Her gown shimmered under the strategic lights of the reception hall, and the room quieted in anticipation, every eye fixed on her radiant figure. She smiled, pausing just long enough for the audience to settle into comfortable silence. "I want to thank all of you for being here," she began, her voice a melodious whisper that carried across the room. "This is truly the happiest day of my life, and I am so incredibly blessed to be surrounded by the people who mean everything to me." I watched from my table at the back, a silent observer, trying to will myself into the exclusive group she was describing, to convince myself I was part of her everything. Leo sat on the edge of his seat beside me, his small legs swinging with excitement, completely captivated by the fairy tale atmosphere unfolding before him. Clara spoke beautifully about her new husband, Ethan, about the serendipity of love, the magic of timing, and the undeniable force of destiny. I began to relax, a fragile hope blossoming in my chest, thinking that perhaps, just perhaps, this speech would not take a cruel turn, that she might, for once, choose kindness. Then, her demeanor shifted, subtly but undeniably. A mischievous glint entered her eyes, and her smile widened, a knowing smirk that sent a chill down my spine. "And, of course," she said with a theatrical pause, "I want to give a special mention to my big sister, Amelia. You've always been such a powerful example for me." The spotlight, both literal and metaphorical, shifted, and I could feel the gazes of hundreds of guests turning in my direction, their curiosity now piqued. I sat up a bit straighter, managing a polite, albeit strained, smile, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. Clara's voice remained light, almost playful, but her words were sharp, honed instruments of public humiliation. "She's truly the most courageous woman I know. She raised a child all by herself, no husband, no partner. Just her and, well, whoever was generous enough to babysit when she needed a break." A few nervous, uncertain chuckles rippled through the room, a hesitant acknowledgement of her joke. My stomach clenched, a cold knot forming in my gut. "But in all seriousness," she continued, her voice gaining a slight edge, "it's remarkable how she's managed. A single mother, unwanted by anyone, yet she still shows up to family events, bravely facing the world." This time, the laughter was genuine, loud, and unrestrained, a tidal wave of mirth that crashed over me. I felt the air leave my lungs, a gasp I couldn't release. A hot flush spread across my cheeks, crawling up my neck, and my hands were frozen, clenched so tightly around the flimsy napkin in my lap that my knuckles turned white. I looked over at Leo. His smile was gone, replaced by a deep frown, his expression full of confusion as he glanced around, his innocent eyes searching the faces of the laughing crowd, trying desperately to figure out why everyone was laughing at his mother. Then came the final, crushing blow, the one that splintered my already fragile composure. My mother, Eleanor, laughed the loudest, a piercing, triumphant sound. Leaning toward her tablemates, she added, just loud enough for me to hear, her voice dripping with thinly veiled scorn, "She's second-hand goods, but she does clean up nicely, I suppose." Another wave of laughter followed, this one devoid of any pretense of kindness or forced politeness. My vision blurred for a moment, the opulent room tilting on its axis. It felt like being struck, a brutal physical assault, but no one had laid a hand on me. They just laughed, their faces contorted in amusement, as if it were perfectly normal and acceptable to mock a woman who had spent nearly a decade working tirelessly, sacrificing everything, to raise her son with dignity and love. As if being on my own by choice or circumstance somehow made me less of a person, less worthy of respect. I looked down at Leo, whose small hand had now found mine, clutching it tightly. His smile was gone, replaced by a raw, naked confusion. He leaned in close, his whisper piercing through the cacophony of laughter. Why did she say that? What does she mean? Unwanted? I wanted to respond, to offer comfort, a logical explanation, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was parched, my voice caught somewhere deep inside. I couldn't protect him from this moment. I couldn't shield him from our family's ugly perception of me. That kind of hurt, the kind that targets your very being and spills over onto your child, is impossible to hide. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate drumbeat. I scanned the room, desperate for an escape route, for anyone who might intervene, who might declare that enough was enough. But no one did. Some guests looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, but they remained silent, their eyes fixed on their glasses, their plates, or their phones, pretending to be utterly absorbed. Even Grandpa Arthur, who used to call me his little lion when I was a child, a term that had always filled me with quiet pride, avoided my gaze, staring intently at the pattern on his tablecloth. He was physically present, but in that moment, he was not with me. I was utterly alone again, stranded on an island of shame. The truth is, I could have endured it if it had only been about me. I have spent years learning to absorb that kind of treatment, to build an impenetrable shield around my heart. I could have forced a brittle smile, taken Leo by the hand, and departed quietly, with my dignity, however bruised, still intact. But seeing the bewilderment in my son's eyes, watching him struggle to understand why the same people who had been clapping and toasting were now laughing at his mother, that broke something fundamental inside me. A maternal ferocity, dormant for years, ignited. I stood up, not because I had a clever retort prepared or because I intended to cause a scene. I stood because I had to get out of that room. I needed to breathe air that wasn't thick with the heavy, suffocating shame they were serving me. As I pushed my chair back, my hands trembling, the metallic screech echoing in the sudden lull, another chair scraped across the polished floor from the head table. Ethan, the groom, Clara's impeccably polished, seemingly oblivious fiancé, was on his feet. He looked pale, his jaw clenched, every muscle in his body taut with unspoken tension. He took the microphone from Clara's hand without a word, his movement precise and deliberate. The room, which had been buzzing with nervous whispers just moments before, fell completely silent. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees. The laughter and whispers vanished, replaced by a tense, heavy stillness. I knew that whatever was about to happen was not on the program. It was not a planned act of reconciliation or a charming gaffe. Ethan stood with one hand resting firmly on the table and the other gripping the microphone, holding it like a weapon. His eyes were locked on me, not on Clara, whose face had gone ashen, not on Eleanor, whose triumphant smile had frozen, not on the sea of laughing guests, but on me specifically. For a moment, a fleeting, desperate moment, I thought he might try to smooth things over with a self-deprecating joke or a charming remark to ease the palpable tension. That was the typical response in my family. Sweep it under the rug, pretend it never happened, call it humor or tradition, and move on. But that is not what he did. He did not smile. He did not laugh. His face was a mask of something I couldn't quite decipher. Anger. Yes, a searing, righteous anger, but something deeper too, like a mixture of profound disappointment and absolute disbelief. Before he could speak, I pushed my chair back in, deciding to make my escape before whatever he said could make it worse, and reached for Leo's hand. I was prepared to make a quiet, graceful exit, to melt away into the night and pretend none of this had ever happened. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down, of seeing tears stream down my face. I had done it before. I could do it again. But as I turned to leave, Ethan's voice echoed through the room. Low, firm, and astonishingly clear, cutting through the silence like a sharp knife. "Amelia, don't go." His words stopped me in my tracks. Every single person in the room, it felt like, turned to face him, their eyes wide with disbelief. A wave of whispers spread through the tables like a wind rustling through dry leaves, gaining momentum, then dying out again. Clara stiffened, her posture rigid, her face a mixture of shock and betrayal. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, a cold fury replacing her earlier amusement. The DJ, instinctively trying to restore the party atmosphere, started to adjust the volume of the background music but froze, his hand suspended in midair, when Ethan raised a hand. He continued to look only at me, his gaze unwavering, a silent anchor in the swirling chaos. "I cannot pretend that I'm okay with what just happened," he stated, his voice resonating with an unexpected power. "I will not stand here and allow that kind of cruelty to be passed off as comedy. Not tonight. Not ever." The room held its breath, the silence now deafening, heavy with unacknowledged truths. Ethan stepped away from the head table, leaving Clara standing alone, looking utterly abandoned. He began to walk forward slowly, deliberately, each step seeming intentional, as if he were pushing against the oppressive atmosphere of the room, carving a path through the collective discomfort. He stopped near our table, where I stood with Leo beside the now cold plates of food, and addressed the guests directly, his voice unwavering. "I've heard a lot about family over this past year of wedding planning," he said, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. "About appearances, tradition, and loyalty. About always sticking together. But what I just witnessed was not family. That was mockery disguised as celebration, humiliation served on a silver platter." The crowd grew restless, a low murmur starting to rise. Some people glanced nervously toward Eleanor, who looked like she might explode. Others stared intently into their drinks, avoiding eye contact. No one spoke, no one dared to interrupt him. He then turned, his full attention now on Clara, who looked as though she wished the floor would swallow her whole. "Clara," he began, his voice calm but sharp as glass, "you ridiculed your sister for being a single mother, for raising her child without any help. You laughed, and worse, you made her son watch you do it. You made an innocent boy believe there was something shameful about his mother, about him." Clara opened her mouth, her lips trembling, but no words came out, only a choked sound. Ethan didn't wait for a response. She didn't ask for her circumstances, but she handled them. She came here today despite everything. She sat in the back. She smiled. She brought her son to see your special day, to share in your joy, and you twisted that act of love and courage into a cheap joke, a public spectacle for your amusement. I had never seen Clara look so small, so utterly stripped of her usual poise and confidence. Ethan turned back to the room, his eyes scanning the faces, leaving no one untouched by his gaze. "Amelia didn't stand up here to defend herself. She didn't ask for your pity. She has never needed a stage to prove her worth, nor does she need it now. But I will not remain silent. Because if I am about to marry into a family that views cruelty as entertainment and shame as a cherished tradition, then I have to seriously reconsider the kind of man I want to be and the values I want to uphold." A collective gasp went through the guests, a ripple of shock and disbelief. A woman at a nearby table whispered loudly, "Is this for real?" Someone, overwhelmed, dropped a fork, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Leo looked up at me, his eyes wide, a mixture of confusion and something else, a dawning understanding, perhaps. I was at a complete loss for what to do. I had come to the wedding expecting to simply get through the evening, to endure the usual slights. I never anticipated being defended, especially not like this, in front of everyone, by the groom himself. Ethan looked down at my son, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly, and gave him a gentle, reassuring nod. Your mom is the strongest person in this room, Leo. Never forget that. And she is far more wanted than anyone here could ever imagine. He then faced the crowd one final time, his voice ringing with quiet finality. I believe I've seen enough for one night. With that, he placed the microphone carefully on the table, walked past Clara without a second glance, her perfect wedding dress now seeming like a costume, and headed straight for the exit, disappearing through the ornate double doors. I stood there, frozen, holding Leo's hand, the small warmth of it the only real thing in the room. The music did not resume. The crowd remained still, statues in a suddenly silent museum. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving behind a vacuum of stunned silence. The fairy tale had been shattered, utterly, irrevocably, but for the first time in a very long time, I was not the one left in pieces. The moment Ethan left the reception hall, a strange, profound switch seemed to flip. The applause and cheers, the clinking of glasses, the lively chatter, all were replaced by the soft, almost imperceptible hum of the air conditioner and the solitary, nervous clink of a spoon against a glass somewhere in the distance. The crowd was utterly stunned, their eyes darting between me, Clara, and the ornate double doors through which Ethan had vanished. Clara remained at the head table, looking as though she had been struck by an invisible force. Her perfect composure had utterly crumbled, her shoulders slumping under the immense, sudden weight of the moment. She looked around, her eyes pleading, but the faces that met hers were no longer smiling. They were a raw, unfiltered mix of shock, embarrassment, and palpable anger, directed not at Ethan, but unmistakably at her. Eleanor was the first to react, her indignation finally breaking the spell. She stood up so abruptly that her chair screeched across the polished floor, the sound harsh in the silent room. "What an ungrateful young man," she declared, her voice shrill, attempting to reclaim her authority. "He humiliated you, Clara, in front of everyone. So typical. Just like your sister, utterly selfish, always ruining things." But her voice lacked its usual commanding authority. The power she held over the room, the invisible strings she usually pulled, had evaporated, and her words landed with a dull, hollow thud. They held no weight. I said nothing. I didn't have to. For the first time in my life, I felt no need to shrink under the force of her words, no need to apologize for my existence. I turned to Leo, who looked up at me with uncertainty, his small hand still clutching mine. "Are we going now?" he asked softly, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, sweetie," I replied, smoothing his hair back from his forehead, a gesture of comfort for both of us. "We're going home." I stood tall as I took his hand, my grip firm, and started walking toward the exit. The weight of hundreds of eyes followed me, but it was different now. People moved aside as I passed, almost reverently. Some averted their eyes, seemingly ashamed, while others looked as though they wanted to speak, to offer a word of comfort or apology, but couldn't find the right words, or perhaps the courage. Halfway to the door, someone called my name, a voice raspy with emotion. "Amelia." I turned. It was my grandfather, Arthur, his pale eyes, usually so stoic, now tinged with red, glistening with unshed tears. He rose slowly from his seat, his movements stiff, and approached me. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet, unsteady, barely audible above the lingering silence. "I should have put a stop to this years ago. I should have spoken up." I gave him a slight nod, a small, sad acknowledgement, not trusting my own voice to remain steady. I didn't harbor any hatred for his inaction. I knew the price of silence all too well. I had paid it myself in different ways for too long. I wasn't angry, not anymore, but I was no longer willing to carry their guilt or their shame. I just walked on. Outside, the air was cool and refreshing, a welcome balm after the suffocating atmosphere of the hall. Leo squeezed my hand, a silent conversation between us. "Is the wedding over?" he asked, his voice still soft, a little curious. I looked down at him and smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached my eyes. "Yes," I said. "I think it ended just the way it was supposed to." We drove home without the radio on, only the quiet hum of the tires on the road and the rhythmic tap of Leo's fingers on the armrest, a quiet, contented beat. That night, after I tucked him into bed, I kissed his forehead and lingered by his door for a little longer than usual, watching his peaceful sleep. He didn't ask any more questions about the wedding. He didn't need to. He understood, in his own 8-year-old way, what had truly happened. The following morning, I woke to a barrage of missed calls from unknown numbers, distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, and even a few guests I barely recognized. I ignored them all, deleting the voicemails without listening. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, a friend who had been at the wedding and had slipped away before the drama unfolded. Someone recorded Ethan's speech. It's on social media and already has over 50,000 views. You should see the comments. People are supporting you, Amelia. They really are. A strange mix of dread and curiosity propelled me. I found the video and watched it, huddled under a blanket on my sofa. There was Ethan's voice, calm and direct, challenging an entire room full of people. And there I was, a blurry figure frozen in the frame, holding Leo's hand, a silent witness to my own public vindication. The comment section was flooded with messages of solidarity, a cascade of empathy and anger directed at my family. This man is a true hero. She deserved so much better than that trash family. I'm in tears watching this. Every single mom just received a small piece of justice tonight. The way she holds her son's hand, that's real strength. I didn't cry, nor did I smile. I just felt a profound sense of stillness, as if a tight, painful knot that had been hardening inside me for years had finally, miraculously, loosened. The shame, the silent burden I had carried, was no longer mine to bear. In the week that followed, Clara attempted, somewhat desperately, to control the narrative. She posted a carefully worded statement on social media, claiming Ethan had overreacted, that her comments were merely a joke taken out of context, and that people were being overly sensitive about a family misunderstanding. She even hinted at a private apology that had been misunderstood. But the truth had already taken root, thanks to the viral video, and no one was laughing anymore. Her carefully constructed image had shattered, and the public, previously so adoring, was unforgiving. A few days later, a small, elegant bouquet of wildflowers, sunflowers and daisies, vibrant and resilient, arrived at my apartment door. There was no elaborate note, just a small, simple card that read, "To the Lioness." I knew immediately who had sent them, and the quiet gesture spoke volumes. The wedding never took place, not officially, not as planned. But something far more significant did. For once, I was not the one burdened with shame. I was not the one who needed to apologize, to explain, to justify my existence. I walked out of that room with my son, my dignity, and my head held higher than it had ever been before. And somewhere, someone unexpected, someone kind, had reminded a room full of people, and perhaps the entire internet, what true strength, true courage, and true love truly looks like. It has been 6 months since the wedding that never was. Clara and Ethan officially canceled their engagement a few weeks after the incident. There was no public statement, No dramatic aftermath in the tabloids, just a quiet, almost imperceptible erasure of what was meant to be a perfect day. Clara has since returned to her carefully curated social life as if nothing happened, her online profile scrubbed clean of any mention of Ethan or the ill-fated wedding. The photos from that night have vanished from her social media, replaced by new, brighter images of superficial perfection. She has not contacted me, though I can't say I ever expected her to. Eleanor called me once, about a month ago. It wasn't to apologize, not truly. It was to accuse me of embarrassing the family by not playing along with the joke, of causing a scene, of ruining Clara's life. I listened for precisely 30 seconds, her voice a familiar, grating whine, before saying something I never thought I would have the courage to say, something that felt like releasing a lifetime of held breath. Mother, I am not your scapegoat anymore. And I'm certainly not responsible for Clara's choices. Or for yours. Then I ended the call. It was not an angry or dramatic act. It was clean, simple, and final, like closing a door I had kept ajar for too long. I've come to realize that I never needed a grand apology from my family, never needed them to suddenly change their ways or acknowledge my worth. I just needed to stop waiting for their permission to see it in myself. My life hasn't been magically transformed overnight. I still work long hours at the diner and the inn, often juggling 2 different dinners because Leo wants pancakes while I need something green. There are still bills to pay and scrape knees to kiss. But I carry myself differently now. I am no longer weighed down by years of quiet shame, no longer tiptoeing around their expectations. I no longer feel the need to hide in the back of rooms or shrink under critical gazes. The heavy cloak of invisibility has lifted. Leo has changed too. He asks more questions now, thoughtful, intelligent ones, about empathy and integrity. He wants to understand why some people choose to be cruel and why others choose to be brave. He sometimes talks about Ethan as if he were a superhero, staging elaborate speeches with his action figures to defend the underdog, his voice mirroring Ethan's unexpected firmness. As I watch him, growing into his own person, I know with absolute certainty that he witnessed something that night that will profoundly influence the man he becomes, strong, kind, and unafraid to speak up when it truly matters. One evening, as we were brushing our teeth side by side, our reflections staring back at us in the steamy bathroom mirror, Leo looked at my reflection and asked, his voice earnest, "Mom, are you still sad about what Aunt Clara said?" I paused for a moment, the toothbrush still in my hand, before replying, "Not anymore, sweetie." "Why do you ask?" He shrugged, a smear of toothpaste on his chin, his eyes twinkling. "Because I think you won, even though it wasn't a fight." His words stayed with me, resonating deep within my soul, because he was absolutely right. I didn't shout, I didn't return the insults, I didn't demand justice or break down in public. I simply stood up, took my son's hand, and walked away. And someone else, someone utterly unexpected, decided that silence was no longer an option. Ethan didn't just defend me. He showed everyone in that room what love actually is. Not the kind that wears a fancy suit or walks down an aisle, but the kind that sees injustice and says, "No, not today. Not on my watch." If I have learned anything profound from that night, it is this. Being alone does not mean you are unwanted. Being kind does not make you weak, and dignity, once you reclaim it and hold it close, is something no one can ever take from you again. So, no, I didn't dance at my sister's wedding. I didn't make a toast, catch a bouquet, or shed happy tears under strings of twinkling lights. But I left with something far more valuable than approval or acceptance from those who offered none. I left with my head held high, my son by my side, and the profound, quiet certainty that I no longer owe anyone an explanation for who I am. That was the ending no one saw coming, and it was exactly the one I deserved. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever been made to feel small or silenced in a room of people who should have supported you, please know this. Your voice is important, your dignity is important, and you are not alone. If you found strength in this narrative, please consider liking this video, sharing it with someone who might need to hear it, and leaving a comment below. I would be interested to know if you have ever had a moment where someone finally stood up for you, or where you found the strength to stand up for yourself. And if you wish to hear more true stories that delve deep, challenge expectations, and remind us of our shared humanity, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for listening.